Have you ever given so much of yourself to the people you love that one day you looked in the mirror and realized you could no longer recognize the person staring back at you? Imagine spending more than 20 years believing every sacrifice was an investment in your family's future, only to discover that while you were protecting everyone else's dreams, your own had quietly disappeared. Some stories begin with flashing lights and dramatic headlines. Others begin in kitchens, grocery stores, laundry rooms, and ordinary homes that look exactly like yours. The story you're about to hear is inspired by real patterns experienced by families who discovered that trust, once taken for granted, can quietly disappear long before anyone realizes it's gone. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, because we love hearing from people around the world. If stories about resilience, family, hidden truths, and second chances speak to you, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear this today. Your support allows us to continue telling stories that remind people they are never alone. Now let's begin. For privacy, we'll call her Emily Carter. If you had met Emily on an ordinary Tuesday morning, you probably would have described her as the woman who somehow managed to hold an entire neighborhood together. She remembered birthdays without checking calendars. She organized holiday dinners months in advance. She knew exactly which medications her aging mother needed, which flowers bloomed in her front yard every spring, and which cereal her grown son still secretly preferred whenever he visited home. Friends admired her patience. Neighbors admired her generosity. Her children believed she could solve almost any problem. Her husband, Daniel, often joked that the entire family would collapse if Emily ever decided to take a day off. Everyone laughed, including Emily. At the time, she believed those words meant she was deeply loved. It never occurred to her that becoming indispensable to everyone else had slowly made her invisible to herself. When Emily married Daniel, they were young, hopeful, and convinced that hard work could overcome almost anything. Their first apartment was small enough that the dining table doubled as a workspace, and the living room became a guest bedroom whenever relatives visited. They talked for hours about the future they wanted to build. Daniel dreamed of becoming successful in business. Emily dreamed of opening a small interior design company where she could transform ordinary houses into warm, welcoming homes. Together they promised that neither dream would ever be forgotten. Like many young couples, they believed they had unlimited time. They imagined success arriving step by step, year after year. Neither of them understood how easily small compromises could become permanent habits. Every time life demanded another sacrifice, they quietly convinced themselves it was only temporary. Temporary became routine. Routine became years. Years became decades before either of them realized how much had changed. Experts who study long-term caregiving often describe something called invisible labor. It includes the thousands of responsibilities that rarely appear on schedules, but somehow determine whether a household functions every single day. Emily carried almost all of it without ever asking for recognition. She remembered school forms before teachers sent reminders. She bought birthday gifts for relatives Daniel rarely spoke to. She kept track of insurance renewals, medical appointments, appliance warranties, family recipes, grocery lists, utility payments, and every little detail everyone else assumed would somehow take care of itself. The remarkable thing about invisible labor is that the better someone performs it, the less anyone notices it exists. Reliability slowly becomes expectation. Gratitude quietly fades into routine. Emily never questioned this because she believed love meant giving freely. She told herself there would be time later to think about her own ambitions. Later always seemed just around the corner. Years passed with astonishing speed. Ryan graduated from high school. Chloe entered college. Family photographs filled every hallway of the Carter home. Looking at those pictures, visitors saw birthdays, vacations, graduations, anniversaries, and smiling faces. What they couldn't see were the countless choices Emily made behind every photograph. She postponed replacing worn furniture because college savings mattered more. She delayed expensive dental treatment because unexpected medical bills arrived first. She quietly returned to part-time work after years at home simply to strengthen Ryan's education fund. Daniel thanked her often for being practical. Emily appreciated his gratitude because she believed they were making every difficult decision together. Whenever she opened the small notebook containing interior design sketches she had created years earlier, she would smile for a moment before closing it again. There would be time later, she reminded herself. There always seemed to be another family priority waiting first. Then one afternoon something happened that should have been completely ordinary. Emily stopped at the grocery store after running errands. She reached toward the frozen food section, paused, and stared silently at dozens of familiar products. Minutes passed before she realized why she couldn't choose anything. Every meal she had planned for decades reflected somebody else's preferences. Daniel preferred grilled chicken. Ryan loved pasta. Chloe disliked spicy food. Even after her children had grown older, Emily still shopped according to habits established years earlier. Standing beneath bright supermarket lights, she quietly asked herself a simple question. What do I actually enjoy eating? The answer never came. She realized she couldn't remember the last meal she had chosen simply because she wanted it. She wasn't forgetting food. She had forgotten herself. She left the store carrying bags filled with everyone else's favorites. But one uncomfortable thought stayed with her all evening. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped being the main character in her own life. Over the following weeks, Emily tried convincing herself she was simply exhausted. She blamed stress. She blamed age. She blamed the constant demands of keeping a family organized. Yet every morning the same quiet emptiness returned. She woke before sunrise, prepared breakfast, packed lunches, answered messages, folded laundry, scheduled appointments, paid bills, and smiled through conversations. But something inside her no longer felt complete. Daniel remained busy discussing exciting investment opportunities and promising business ventures that would supposedly secure their retirement. Emily rarely asked questions because she trusted him completely. Their financial responsibilities had naturally divided over the years. She managed the household budget while Daniel managed investments and long-term savings. It seemed sensible. It seemed efficient. Most importantly, it seemed built on trust. That trust would soon face the greatest test of their entire marriage. Everything changed on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon while Emily searched the home office for old tax documents before another family dinner. Hidden behind several folders rested one labeled with Ryan's college savings account. Emily smiled as she reached for it. That folder represented years of sacrifice. Every monthly contribution reminded her that the difficult choices had been worth making because they were creating opportunities for her children. She opened the folder expecting reassurance. Instead, she found confusion. Several statements were missing. The remaining pages showed withdrawal after withdrawal she couldn't explain. She checked the account number twice, then 3 times. The numbers remained exactly the same. Almost every dollar saved across years of careful planning had disappeared within 6 months. There was no tuition payment, no medical emergency, no explanation. Only repeated transfers into unfamiliar accounts connected to business projects Daniel had never mentioned. Emily stared silently at the papers, convinced there had to be an error. The documents refused to change. That evening, Emily said nothing. Ryan laughed while talking about a possible promotion at work. Chloe excitedly described a weekend trip she hoped to take with friends. Daniel spoke confidently about another investment opportunity that sounded just as promising as the dozens he had mentioned over the years. Emily watched him carefully, searching his face for the slightest sign that he knew what she had discovered. There wasn't one. He smiled naturally, passed the mashed potatoes to Ryan, complimented Emily's cooking, and joked about finally taking a vacation once his latest business project succeeded. Every word sounded ordinary. Every smile looked genuine. That was what unsettled Emily most. The missing money wasn't hidden behind nervous behavior or suspicious excuses. It was hidden behind complete normalcy. She cleared the dishes, loaded the dishwasher, wished everyone good night, and quietly returned to the home office. Sitting alone beneath the soft glow of the desk lamp, she spread every account statement across the table once again. If Daniel hadn't made a mistake, then he had made a decision. Those were 2 very different things. Sleep never came that night. Emily remained at the kitchen table until sunrise, comparing dates, account numbers, and transaction histories. Every withdrawal carried a memory. One transfer happened the same week. She postponed replacing their leaking washing machine because Daniel insisted. Money was tight. Another matched the month Chloe asked about studying abroad, only to be told the family couldn't afford it. Yet another appeared during the year. Emily quietly returned to part-time work because she wanted to increase Ryan's college savings. Looking back, every sacrifice suddenly carried a different meaning. She remembered patching worn furniture instead of buying new pieces. She remembered skipping vacations. She remembered convincing herself that delayed dreams were simply part of responsible adulthood. Daniel had always thanked her for being practical. She believed they were making those difficult choices together. Now she wondered if she had been sacrificing alone while someone else quietly rewrote the future they had promised each other years earlier. As the first rays of sunlight entered the kitchen, Emily made a decision she never imagined making. She would not confront Daniel immediately. Anger demanded answers, but patience promised truth. If there was one hidden account, there might be others. If one promise had been broken, perhaps more had quietly disappeared without her ever noticing. That morning she prepared breakfast exactly as she always had. Eggs, toast, fruit, fresh coffee. Daniel complimented the meal before rushing off to another meeting. Ryan thanked her before leaving for work. Chloe hugged her goodbye. Emily smiled warmly at each of them, hiding the growing storm beneath remarkable calm. Nobody suspected anything had changed because outwardly nothing had. Inside, however, Emily had become someone entirely different. She was no longer simply the woman holding the household together. She had become an investigator searching for answers beneath the roof she had called home for more than 2 decades. Over the next several days, Emily continued every familiar routine while quietly building a completely different one. Whenever Daniel left for work, she opened filing cabinets she hadn't touched in years. She sorted through storage boxes filled with old tax returns, insurance records, warranty papers, and forgotten household documents. At first, everything appeared perfectly ordinary. Then small inconsistencies began appearing like pieces of a puzzle scattered across different rooms. There were business registrations she had never heard Daniel mention, insurance policies listing unfamiliar addresses, letters from financial institutions she didn't recognize, statements mailed to a private post office box rather than their family home. None of those discoveries alone proved deception. Together, they painted a picture Emily had never expected to see. Her husband hadn't simply hidden financial decisions. He had built an entirely separate financial life that existed alongside the marriage she believed they shared. Every folder she opened seemed to reveal another conversation that had never happened. One rainy afternoon, Emily carried several old storage boxes from the garage into the basement. She was looking for Christmas decorations when she noticed something unusual behind a heavy metal shelf. A weathered plastic container sat hidden beneath years of dust, positioned so carefully that it almost disappeared into the darkness. Curious, she pulled it forward and brushed away the dirt covering its lid. Inside were dozens of neatly organized folders. Emily expected old receipts or forgotten family photographs. Instead, she found business contracts, partnership agreements, loan applications, handwritten investment notes, and correspondence from people whose names she had never heard before. One folder documented repeated transfers between multiple accounts. Another listed failed business ventures stretching back almost 8 years. The deeper she searched, the clearer the pattern became. Every time one investment failed, Daniel quietly invested more family money into another opportunity, convinced success would eventually recover every previous loss. Instead of admitting failure, he kept borrowing against the future Emily believed they were protecting together. Emily sat silently on the cold basement floor surrounded by documents that completely reshaped 20 years of memories. She expected overwhelming anger. Instead, she felt something far heavier. Grief settled over her like a quiet winter evening. She wasn't grieving the missing money alone. She was grieving the version of her marriage she had carried in her heart for more than 2 decades. She remembered evenings when Daniel thanked her for stretching the grocery budget while secretly transferring thousands of dollars elsewhere. She remembered telling friends they couldn't afford dinners out because they were saving responsibly for the future. She remembered reassuring Ryan that patience would make college easier someday. None of those moments could ever be reclaimed. Yet while sitting among the evidence of hidden choices, Emily noticed another feeling slowly replacing fear. For years she had worried about disappointing everyone else. Suddenly, she realized she had been disappointing herself every single day without even recognizing it. Rather than confronting Daniel immediately, Emily began quietly preparing for a life she never imagined she might need. She met with a financial advisor recommended by an old college friend. She opened a personal checking account for the first time since getting married. She gathered copies of retirement statements, property records, insurance policies, and tax documents. She scheduled a confidential consultation with an attorney, not because she had already decided to leave, but because she wanted to understand the choices available to her. Each meeting reminded Emily of something she thought she had lost forever: confidence. She updated her resume after nearly 20 years away from professional work. She enrolled in an online interior design certification program during quiet evenings while everyone else slept. The notebook filled with old design sketches returned to her bedside table. For the first time in years, she wasn't simply remembering an abandoned dream. She was making room for it again. Daniel noticed nothing unusual. Life continued exactly as it always had from his perspective. Breakfast appeared every morning. Laundry remained folded. Bills were paid on time. Family dinners continued without interruption. Emily smiled politely, asked about his meetings, and listened as he spoke enthusiastically about business opportunities. What Daniel couldn't see was that every ordinary conversation carried extraordinary meaning now. Emily wasn't pretending everything was fine because she feared the truth. She was giving herself time to understand it completely. Then one afternoon her phone rang. The caller introduced herself as a former business partner of Daniel's. She apologized for reaching out unexpectedly, but explained that several investors had begun searching for Daniel regarding unfinished projects and unpaid obligations. She assumed Emily already knew everything. Emily listened quietly as another layer of hidden decisions unfolded before her. When the call ended, she understood something that changed everything. The missing college fund represented only a small piece of a much larger problem. The conversation she had been preparing to have with Daniel would no longer be about money alone. It would be about every secret that had quietly grown between them while she devoted herself to building the family they both claimed to cherish. Daniel came home just after sunset expecting another ordinary evening. The familiar smell of roasted vegetables filled the kitchen. Soft music drifted through the hallway. The house looked exactly as it had every other evening for years. To him, nothing had changed. Emily had prepared dinner, set the table, and turned on the porch light as she always did. Yet there was one detail Daniel immediately noticed. Emily wasn't moving around the kitchen making last-minute preparations. She was sitting quietly at the dining table with a thick leather folder resting in front of her. Her hands were folded calmly on top of it. She looked up as he walked through the door and smiled politely. But there was a steadiness in her eyes he had never seen before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was certainty. For the first time in 23 years of marriage, Emily looked like someone who no longer needed anyone's permission to speak. Daniel loosened his tie, kissed her lightly on the forehead, and asked if everything was all right. Emily nodded gently and invited him to sit down. Something in her voice made him pause. It was calm enough to make him uneasy. Daniel lowered himself into the chair across from her. Before he could ask another question, Emily slowly slid the leather folder across the table. He opened it with casual curiosity that disappeared almost instantly. Inside were copies of bank statements, investment transfers, business contracts, loan agreements, retirement withdrawals, insurance documents, and handwritten notes he believed no one else had ever seen. His eyes moved quickly from one page to another before returning to Emily. For several long seconds he said absolutely nothing. The silence between them felt heavier than any argument they had ever experienced. Daniel finally cleared his throat and quietly asked where she had found the documents. Emily answered with remarkable composure. She told him she had found enough to understand that the missing college fund wasn't an accident. It wasn't a bookkeeping mistake. It wasn't even one bad investment. It was years of decisions made without her knowledge. Daniel looked down again, knowing there was no explanation capable of making the evidence disappear. Every document carried his signature. Every transfer carried his approval. Every page quietly confirmed the truth Emily had spent weeks uncovering. Daniel leaned back in his chair and covered his face with both hands. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded smaller than Emily had ever heard before. He admitted that several business ventures had failed years earlier. At first, he genuinely believed he could recover every dollar before anyone noticed. Each new investment promised to erase the previous mistake. Every failure convinced him the next opportunity would finally solve everything. Instead of asking for help, He convinced himself he simply needed more time. When retirement savings no longer covered the losses, he borrowed against Ryan's college account. When that wasn't enough, he moved money from other family investments. Every decision felt temporary while he made it. Every lie felt necessary because admitting failure seemed impossible. He wasn't trying to hurt his family, he insisted. He was trying to protect them from disappointment. Emily listened without interrupting. She believed every word he said about fear, embarrassment, and pride. She also understood that none of those emotions changed what had happened. For years, she had been carrying the weight of the household, while Daniel quietly carried secrets instead of sharing burdens. Emily stood without saying a word and walked into the living room. A few moments later, she returned carrying a small wooden keepsake box covered with faded scratches from years of use. Daniel immediately recognized it. They had bought it together shortly after getting married. Emily placed it gently beside the financial documents and slowly lifted the lid. Inside rested photographs from their first apartment, handwritten love letters, old birthday cards from Ryan and Chloe, postcards from family vacations, and a worn notebook held together with an elastic band. She carefully removed the notebook and placed it in front of Daniel. Inside were dozens of interior design sketches she had drawn during the early years of their marriage. Elegant living rooms, cozy kitchens, beautiful family homes. Every page reflected a dream she once believed would become her future. Daniel quietly turned each page before looking back at Emily. She softly explained that the folder represented everything they had lost financially, but the notebook represented everything she had lost personally. She hadn't brought it to make him feel guilty. She brought it because she finally understood that while Daniel had hidden money, she had hidden herself. Both choices had cost them far more than either of them realized. Emily gently closed the notebook and looked around the dining room, where countless family dinners had taken place over the years. She remembered birthdays celebrated around that table, Christmas mornings filled with laughter, homework spread across its polished surface, and countless evenings spent believing she was building something permanent. She realized that despite everything she had discovered, she didn't hate Daniel. Hate would have been easier. What she felt instead was profound disappointment mixed with unexpected freedom. She finally understood that the person responsible for rebuilding her future wasn't sitting across the table. It was herself. She quietly told Daniel that trust isn't destroyed the day someone tells a lie. Trust begins disappearing the moment people stop facing difficult conversations together. Somewhere along the way, they had both stopped protecting their marriage. Daniel protected his image while Emily protected everyone else's comfort. Neither of them protected the truth. That truth had finally arrived, and neither of them could pretend it wasn't sitting between them anymore. Daniel's eyes filled with tears as he asked whether there was anything left to save. Emily paused before answering because she wanted to choose her words carefully. She explained that forgiveness and rebuilding are not always the same journey. Some relationships survive broken trust because both people grow together afterward. Others survive only long enough for both people to discover who they have become. She admitted she genuinely hoped Daniel would rebuild his life, repay every debt he could, and become the honest man she believed he wanted to be. But she also admitted something she had never allowed herself to say aloud. She could no longer continue living as the woman who quietly disappeared so everyone else could remain comfortable. That version of Emily had already given away enough years. She wasn't leaving because she hated him. She was leaving because she had finally remembered the promise she made to herself long before she became anyone's wife or mother. She deserved the chance to become that woman again. The following morning, the sun rose over the Carter home exactly as it had every day for more than 2 decades. Birds sang from the maple trees. Neighbors walked their dogs. Children waited for school buses. From the outside, nothing looked different. Inside, everything had changed. Emily packed one carefully chosen suitcase instead of taking everything she owned. She wasn't trying to erase her past. She was simply making room for her future. Ryan and Chloe arrived later that afternoon after Emily asked them to visit. Their first reaction was disbelief. They had always viewed their parents as the couple everyone else admired. Emily patiently explained the situation without attacking Daniel or assigning blame. She wanted her children to understand that honesty is one of the greatest expressions of love. Secrets don't simply hide information. They quietly reshape relationships until strangers begin living inside familiar homes. Ryan and Chloe struggled to process everything they had learned, but they also saw something they hadn't noticed in years. Their mother stood before them with quiet confidence instead of quiet exhaustion. For the first time in a very long time, Emily wasn't simply surviving her own life. She was finally beginning to live it.